You know where you just walked into? The big man behind the counter asked, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. Every head in the room turned. Every eye landed on her. Charlotte Miller didn't flinch. She set her resume down on the bar like she was placing a winning hand. I know exactly where I am. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence said everything because for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, someone had walked through that door and stayed standing. If this story already has you feeling something, we want you right here with us until the very last word. Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. We want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. Charlotte Miller had been rejected 41 times in 6 weeks. Not 41 rejections spread across months. Not a slow and painful drip of disappointment she could pace herself through. 41 in 6 weeks. That worked out to nearly 7 closed doors per week, sometimes 2 in a single day. She kept a count because she didn't know what else to do with the numbers accumulating in her chest. Writing them down made them feel like data instead of wounds. She was 26 years old and she had arrived in Silver Creek, Arizona with a pickup truck that burned oil every 300 miles, a suitcase containing most of what she owned, and $412 in a checking account that was bleeding out faster than she could think. She'd driven from Columbus, Ohio in 3 days because staying in Columbus had stopped being an option the moment the restaurant where she'd bartended for 4 years announced it was closing. That was the first domino. The second was her apartment lease, which expired the same month. The third was the relationship she'd been quietly hoping might give her a reason to stay, and instead gave her one more reason to leave. She'd chosen Silver Creek almost at random, an online forum about towns with low cost of living and growing small business economies had mentioned it once, buried in a thread from 3 years ago. Someone said the desert air was different there. Someone else said it was quiet in a way that let you think. Charlotte had clicked the link for the town's local Facebook community group, scrolled for 10 minutes, and decided that people who organized pie drives for elderly neighbors and posted photographs of their dogs at the gas station were probably the kind of people she could build something near. What she had not planned for was that Silver Creek, for all its dusty charm and community pie drives, had an unemployment rate that crept upward every year as the bigger retail chains slowly strangled the small businesses, and that every employer she walked into already had a waiting list of people who had been living there for years. The diner on Route 9 told her they'd keep her resume on file. The hardware store said they weren't hiring until spring. The motel at the edge of town said the position had just been filled. The grocery store, the laundromat, the 2 gas stations, and the small insurance office near the library each told her versions of the same story. Come back later. Try again next month. We'll call you. They never called. By the middle of her 3rd week, Charlotte had moved out of the one motel she could afford and into her truck, parking each night in a rest stop 12 miles outside town where nobody asked questions. She used the library bathroom to wash her face and change her shirt. She ate peanut butter from a jar because the bread made it feel like a meal. She was not looking for sympathy. She never had been. What she was looking for was a job, which was a different thing entirely. It was on a Wednesday during what had become her daily routine of walking through the commercial strips of Silver Creek in search of any sign she'd missed that she saw the posting taped inside the window of a place called the Black Stallion Bar. Bartender wanted, full-time, inquire inside. She almost walked past it. She had passed the Black Stallion before several times. Every person she had spoken to in Silver Creek had mentioned it at least once, usually in the same breath as a warning. People said that bar was owned by the motorcycle club. People said the men who drank there were the kind of men you didn't want to make eye contact with. A woman at the grocery store checkout had actually put her hand on Charlotte's arm one afternoon and said with complete seriousness, "You steer clear of that building, sweetheart. Nothing good comes from going near that place." Charlotte had thanked her and steered clear. But that was before the $400 became $3, and then $250, and then her truck started making a sound she could not afford to diagnose. Before she started doing the math in her head, every time she filled up her water bottle or bought another jar of peanut butter, fear is a luxury she had started to understand. When survival becomes the only calculation, fear gets demoted. It doesn't disappear. She was still afraid. She could feel it sitting in her stomach like a cold stone, but it stops being the loudest voice in the room. She stood outside the Black Stallion for 11 minutes. She counted those too. She listened to the rumble of sound coming from inside. Music she couldn't quite name, the low frequency of male voices in conversation. She looked at the posting again. Full-time inquire inside. She pushed open the door. The first thing she noticed was the leather. There were men seated at every table at the bar stools in the booths along the far wall, and every single one of them was wearing a leather vest with patches she couldn't read from the doorway. The music was coming from somewhere she couldn't see. The air smelled like beer and motor oil and something older, something that had been absorbed into the wood over years and years of human presence. The second thing she noticed was the silence. It felt like a curtain dropping fast and total. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Someone set a glass down. Every face in the room turned toward the door, toward her. Charlotte's legs understood the impulse to retreat. Her body understood it so well she could feel the tug of it in the back of her knees. But she had spent 6 weeks retreating. She had retreated from Columbus, from a lease, from a relationship, from 41 employers who hadn't wanted what she had to offer. She was running out of directions to retreat into. She walked to the bar. The man behind it was tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his late 50s, with gray hair pulled back and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same red rock as the desert surrounding the town. He did not look alarmed by her presence. He looked the way mountains look when something small stands in front of them, patient, permanent, and not particularly interested in being impressed. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "You know where you just walked into?" His voice was not unkind. It was simply direct, in a way that left no room for confusion about what he was asking. Charlotte set her resume on the counter. It was printed on regular paper from the library printer. She had paid 15 cents per page and used both sides to include her full work history. She slithered it across the bar toward him. "I know exactly where I am," she said. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically. More like a slight change in atmospheric pressure, the way the air feels different right before weather arrives. The man looked down at the paper. He did not pick it up. "That job's been posted for 4 months," he said. 3 people came in for it. None of them lasted a full shift. "What happened to them?" Charlotte asked. He met her eyes. "Decided the job wasn't for them." "Did you fire them?" "No." "Then they quit." "That's one word for it." Charlotte stood a little straighter. "I'm not going to quit." He studied her for a long moment, the kind of moment that had weight to it, that took up actual space. Around the room, nobody had gone back to their conversations yet. She could feel the attention of 24 people on her back like a second gravity. "You from around here?" he asked. "Ohio," she said. "I moved here about 3 weeks ago." "You know who we are?" "I know what people say about you," she said. "I figured I should come see for myself." That was when the corner of his mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile, but was the closest thing to it she'd seen on his face. He picked up the resume, read it in silence, turned it over, read the back. 4 years bartending, he said. "Yes. Restaurant bar, not a standalone." "That's right. We did about 200 covers on a busy Friday night. I worked the service bar and the public side both." He set the paper down. "This place is different. I figured it would be. Most people are scared to work here." Charlotte looked at him without looking away. "I noticed that. The posting has been in the window a while." Something moved behind his eyes, recognition maybe, or something he was deciding about. "I'm Marcus Callahan," he said. He didn't extend his hand, but he said it like it meant something. "Charlotte Miller." "You know my name?" "No," she said honestly. "Should I?" That time something happened that was definitively a smile brief as a flash of light. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said. "Bar opens at 10. You'd come in early to prep and get oriented. See how it goes." "I'll be here," she said. "You're not going to ask about the pay." "You'll tell me what it pays," she said. "If it's enough to keep the lights on, I'll take it." Marcus Callahan looked at her for one more beat. "We'll figure out the lights." Charlotte picked up her copy of the resume she'd printed in 2 and walked back through the bar. The conversations had started back up around her, but quieter now, different in temperature. She felt eyes following her to the door. She did not look back. She pushed out into the afternoon desert heat and walked half a block before her legs started shaking. She leaned against the side of a building, put her hands on her knees, and took 3 slow breaths. Then she stood up straight because she had a shift tomorrow at 6, and she needed to figure out where she was going to sleep tonight. She showed up the next morning at 5:45. She wasn't trying to make a point about punctuality. She simply had nowhere else to be, and she had been awake since 3, parked in her usual spot at the rest stop, with the windows cracked and the desert dark around her, running through everything she knew about bartending and everything she didn't know about what she was walking into. Marcus Callahan was already behind the bar when she arrived. He looked at the time on his watch, a plain, practical watch, nothing fancy about it, and then at her and nodded once. That nod felt like a door opening by exactly the width she needed to walk through. He spent the first hour walking her through the layout. The bar was bigger than it looked from the front, with a back room she hadn't seen that held 2 pool tables and a dartboard and a long table that looked like it was used for meetings. The kitchen produced bar food, only wings, burgers, fried things, and was run by a man named Pete, who communicated primarily in grunts and who handed her a plate of eggs without being asked when she came back for the kitchen walkthrough. Pete doesn't like most people, Marcus said, watching her eat the eggs. Should I be worried? Charlotte asked. He made you breakfast, Marcus said. You're ahead of schedule. The regulars started arriving before 10. Not the whole club. She would learn later that the full membership of the Silver Creek chapter of the Hells Angels numbered somewhere around 30 men, and not all of them came to the bar every day. But by noon on her first day, there were 20 people inside, and Charlotte was moving. She was good at her job. She had always known that in the abstract, the way you know things about yourself that you've never had to prove under unusual conditions. What she discovered on that first day at the Black Stallion was that she was good at it in ways that translated across contexts she hadn't expected. She remembered faces after seeing them once. She remembered what people ordered. She learned to read the rhythm of a room, when it was building towards something louder and more volatile, and when it was settling, and she moved accordingly. The men watched her, not the way she'd feared being watched, more like they were waiting for her to do something that would confirm a suspicion they had already formed. Whether that suspicion was positive or negative, she couldn't always tell. By the end of the third day, she had been tested in 6 different ways. A man she later learned was called Grizzly had set a glass on the edge of the bar with 4 inches of space between it and his hand, waiting to see if she'd reach over him to grab it or ask him to move it. She'd leaned past without comment and taken the glass and refilled it and set it back without making anything of it. He'd looked at her for a moment, nodded once, same nod Marcus had given her. A younger member, maybe 23, had tried to engage her in a conversation that was designed to see if she'd flirt back in a way that would compromise her professionally. She'd answered his questions pleasantly and redirected every single one of them towards something practical. He'd actually laughed at the end of it, not mockingly, but with a kind of surprised appreciation. You're quick, he'd said. Thank you, she'd replied and moved on. The third test had been subtler. A man had come in late on the second evening, sat at the end of the bar, away from everyone else, and ordered a club soda without explanation. He'd been there for 2 hours, not speaking to anyone, and the room had rearranged itself quietly around him in a way that told her he was significant without telling her why. She'd kept his glass full without asking each time, and hadn't treated him differently than anyone else. When he finally got up to leave, he'd left a $20 tip on a $3 order. She'd found out later his name was Marcus's older brother Vincent, who had driven down from Phoenix to see what the new hire was like. She passed the test, not because she was performing or strategizing, but because the traits required to pass them were simply who she was: attentive, unflustered, direct, without being rude and honest, in a way that came naturally rather than as a stance. What she had not expected was what she would discover in return. The first thing happened on her 4th day. She came in at 6 as usual and found Marcus on the phone in the back office, which meant the front of the bar was empty and she was prepping alone. She was cutting limes when the back door opened and 2 men came in carrying an elderly woman in a wheelchair. The woman was small and white-haired and looked like she hadn't slept in days, and she was crying quietly, the kind of crying that has gone on long enough to become quiet. One of the men was a Hells Angels member that she'd seen in the bar twice before. The other she didn't recognize. Marcus here, the member asked. On the phone, Charlotte said. 2 minutes maybe. The man nodded. He set down a leather bag and knelt in front of the woman in the wheelchair. It's okay, Edna, he said. His voice, which in the bar had always been low and rough, was completely different when he said that. Soft in a way that didn't match anything about his exterior. We'll get this sorted out. Marcus came out of the office 2 minutes later as she'd predicted. The 3 of them went to the back room. Charlotte went back to her limes. An hour later, Marcus came back out alone. He went behind the bar, poured himself a coffee, and stood there for a moment. That woman's name is Edna Riordan, he said. He seemed to be talking to himself as much as to Charlotte. She's 74. Her house flooded in the storm 3 weeks ago. Insurance company denied the claim. She's been staying at her daughter's place, but there's not enough room, and the daughter's got 3 kids, and there's... He stopped, set the coffee cup down. There's work that needs to happen before she can go back. Charlotte finished cutting a lime. Are you asking for help or telling me something? He looked at her. Neither, just saying. But that weekend she drove past Edna Riordan's house on the south side of Silver Creek and found 6 motorcycles parked out front and 8 Hells Angels members replacing a damaged roof section, hauling out waterlogged drywall, and carrying a new water heater up the front steps. Nobody had been asked to come. They had simply come. She sat in her truck and watched for 20 minutes. The second thing happened in her second week. A young man named Caleb had come into the bar looking for Marcus with the specific expression of someone who was trying very hard to hold himself together and not quite managing. He was maybe 25, and his hands were wrapped in the kind of way that said work not fighting calluses along the palms in the base of the fingers. He found Marcus at the pool table, and Charlotte watched them talk. Not close enough to hear, but close enough to see that Marcus listened without interrupting for a long time, and that at the end of the conversation he put his hand briefly on the younger man's shoulder. Caleb left. Marcus came back to the bar. Mechanic, he said when she set a fresh coffee in front of him. Works at the shop on 5th. Had an accident with a press last month. Lost 2 fingers. He picked up the coffee. Hospital bills are the kind that turn into debt that turns into everything else falling apart. A week later, Charlotte saw Caleb at the gas station. He looked different, not better, because a man missing 2 fingers doesn't get better in a month, but the particular quality of held-together desperation was gone. She said hello. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't immediately read, and then he said, "You work at the Black Stallion, right?" "I do," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Tell Marcus thank you," he said. "He knows what for." She didn't ask what for. She already knew the shape of it. By the end of her 3rd week, she understood something about the Black Stallion and the men who occupied it that contradicted everything she had heard before she opened that door. The town of Silver Creek talked about the Hells Angels as a threat, a source of danger and disorder, something to be kept at a distance. What Charlotte was witnessing was different. She was witnessing men who had built over decades a system of informal mutual aid that operated completely outside the visibility of the town that feared them. They fixed roofs. They paid medical bills. They showed up to funerals when families ran out of people who could come. They made calls on behalf of men and women who didn't know how to make the calls themselves. They did none of it publicly. They sought no recognition. They didn't explain themselves to anyone, which meant the town had no idea who was actually protecting them. Charlotte thought about this for a long time. She thought about it while she was stacking glasses and counting out the register and driving back to the rest stop at night. She thought about it in the way you think about something that changes the shape of a thing you thought you understood. She had come to the Black Stallion because she had no other choice. But she was staying because what she'd found inside was more complicated and more human than anything the fear outside could accommodate. And then she made a mistake. A small one. A completely innocent one. But it cost her something she hadn't known she was building. It was a Thursday evening. The bar was fuller than usual, 30 or 40 people, and a man she hadn't seen before came in and sat at the bar and ordered a beer and started asking her questions. At first, she thought he was just friendly. He was clean-cut, maybe 40, and didn't give off any of the energy she'd learned to recognize as hostile. He asked where she was from, how long she'd been in town, what she thought of the bar. She answered the way she answered anyone honestly, and without particular caution, because she still had no reason for caution toward him. He asked what the busiest nights were. She told him. He asked if the owner was around much. She said Marcus came in every day. He asked if there were busy times for that too. She answered that one too, and it was only after he paid and left that she noticed Jake Dawson watching her from the far end of the bar with an expression that made the back of her neck cold. Jake Dawson was 38. He was not the largest man in the Hells Angels chapter, but something about him took up more space than his physical dimensions accounted for. He had dark eyes that missed almost nothing and a jaw that looked like it had been set against something painful a long time ago and never fully relaxed. He had barely spoken to Charlotte since her first day. Not hostilely, he ordered drinks the same way everyone else did. And he wasn't rude, but with a distance that felt deliberate, like he was keeping something back. He walked down the length of the bar and stood in front of her. "Who was that?" he asked. "I don't know his name," she said. "He just sat down and ordered a beer." "What did he want to know?" she told him. Exactly what the man had asked, and exactly what she'd answered in the same tone she'd have told anyone anything, because she hadn't lied and she hadn't done anything wrong, and she knew that even as Jake's expression darkened. "You're new here," Jake said. "I'm aware of that. You don't know who you're talking to when people walk in." "I don't," she agreed. "I'm going to need time to learn that." But I answered his questions the same way I'd answer any customer's questions. I didn't give him anything that isn't visible from the parking lot. "You told him when Marcus comes in." "I told him Marcus is here every day." "That's not a secret. His truck's out front every day." Jake held her gaze. The silence between them wasn't comfortable. It wasn't supposed to be. "We've had trouble recently," he said. "Things getting back to people they shouldn't reach." Charlotte set down the rag she'd been holding. "I understand that looks like it's pointing at me. I'm new. I don't have history here. I get why you'd wonder." "Do you?" "Yes," she said. "I'd wonder too." "Then why should we trust you?" She thought about that for a moment. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she wanted the answer to be accurate. "Because I needed this job so badly, I was willing to walk through a door everyone told me was dangerous," she said. "And I have been here every single day since, and I have worked my hardest, and I have kept my mouth shut about everything I've seen that wasn't my business. That's the only answer I've got. If it's not enough for you, tell me right now, and I'll be gone before Marcus has to make a call." Jake looked at her for a long moment. "Nobody walks in here and says that," he said finally. "Says what? Tell me now and I'll leave." "Nobody says that. They defend themselves. They get angry. They appeal to Marcus." He paused. "You just offered to walk away." "I offered to give you clarity," she said. "It's not the same thing." Jake was quiet. She went back to the bar. He didn't leave immediately. He stood there for another minute, and she could feel him working through something in his head. Something larger than the specific question of whether she'd given information to the wrong person. He left without saying anything else. But the next morning when she came in at 5:45, there was a coffee already poured and sitting at the end of the bar nearest the door. Marcus was in the back office. There was nobody else in the building yet. She picked up the coffee. It was still hot. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did Jake when he came in at 8. But something had shifted in a way that didn't announce itself, but was real nonetheless. Something was changing at the Black Stallion slowly and without fanfare, the way things change when someone starts paying attention. And Charlotte Miller, who had come to Silver Creek with $412 and no plan beyond survival, was at the center of it, not because she had intended to be, but because she had simply refused to stop showing up. What she didn't know yet was that someone else had a plan for the Black Stallion too. A plan that had nothing to do with belonging or community or second chances. A plan that was going to test everything she had built and everyone she had come to know in ways none of them were ready for. The coffee was still warm when Charlotte picked it up that first morning, left by hands she hadn't expected from a man who hadn't said a word. That small thing told her more about Jake Dawson than 3 weeks of watching him ever had. And it told her something about herself too. She was no longer just surviving inside the Black Stallion. She was beginning to belong to it. But belonging to something always costs something. She just didn't know yet what the price was going to be. The trouble didn't announce itself. It never does. It arrived the way bad weather arrives in the desert, not with clouds you can watch building on the horizon, but suddenly all at once, with no warning except the way the air changed right before everything shifted. It started with a health inspection. Charlotte was behind the bar on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into the job, when 2 men in county-issued polo shirts walked through the front door carrying clipboards. They were polite. They were professional. They smiled at her in the way that suggested they were performing politeness rather than feeling it. They asked to see the kitchen. Pete came out from the back, drying his hands on a dish towel, and looked at the inspectors. The way a dog looks at something, it's already decided it doesn't trust. He said nothing and led them back without being asked. Marcus appeared from the office 20 minutes later, stood in the doorway, and watched. The inspection took 2 hours and 40 minutes. For a bar kitchen that was clean, Charlotte knew it was clean because she had been in it every morning, and Pete ran his operation like a man who took personal offense at disorder. 2 hours and 40 minutes was not routine. That was methodical. That was someone looking for something specific. They found three things: a thermometer reading 3 degrees off calibration, a storage label with a date that should have been changed the previous Friday, a crack in the grout along the base of the prep station wall, cosmetic, present since long before Charlotte had arrived. They issued a notice of correction required with a 30-day compliance window and a mandatory follow-up inspection. Marcus thanked them without expression and closed the door behind them. He stood at the end of the bar for a moment. Then he said, "That's the second time in 3 weeks." Charlotte looked up. Second inspection, different department, fire safety 2 weeks ago, found an exit sign with a bulb out. Technically correct bulb was out. Nobody here noticed it because nobody uses that exit, and the sign is 14 feet off the ground. He poured himself a coffee and didn't drink it. And 2 weeks before that, a noise complaint at 2 in the afternoon. Charlotte said nothing because she was doing the math, and the math was saying something worth paying attention to. "What's on the other side of that parking lot?" she asked. Marcus looked at Hero. "The vacant land," she said. "Who owns it?" He set the coffee cup down slowly. The way someone sets something down when they're being careful about their hands because their hands want to do something else. "Man named Richard Holloway," he said. "Runs a development company out of Tucson. Bought it 18 months ago. Been quiet since." "Has he approached you?" "6 months ago, wanted to buy the building in this lot. Said he had plans for the whole block." "And you said no." "And I said no." Charlotte wiped down the bar surface she'd already wiped twice. "So the inspection started after you said no?" 3 months after, Marcus said, which is patient as these things go. "How much pressure does it take?" Charlotte asked. "If the inspections keep coming, if there are enough notices, enough compliance costs, enough time lost dealing with it." Marcus looked at her steadily. "Enough pressure eventually makes most people sell. But not you." "This bar has been here 31 years, he said. "I poured the first drink in this building the year my oldest daughter was born." "No," he picked up the coffee, drank it this time. "Not me." Charlotte nodded once and went back to work. But something had lodged itself in her chest, something that didn't sit right, that kept turning over the way a stone turns over in moving water. Someone was applying pressure. Someone was patient about it. Someone had resources enough to file multiple complaints across multiple county departments in a way that was perfectly legal and perfectly designed to wear down the opposition. That someone was Richard Holloway. And that someone had not yet played his biggest card. She found that out 11 days later. It came from a source she hadn't expected. A woman named Gloria who was 72 and came into the Black Stallion every Thursday afternoon to sit at the corner table and drink exactly 1 glass of sweet tea and play 2 games of solitaire. Charlotte had figured out quickly that Gloria was not connected to the club. She was simply a Thursday afternoon fixture who had been coming in long enough that her presence was as natural as the bar stools. She had sharp eyes and the kind of voice that carried effortlessly without ever sounding like it was trying to carry. On a Thursday in her 4th week, Gloria leaned across the bar while Charlotte was restocking and said with the casual delivery of someone commenting on the weather, "You know they're saying you're the one behind it?" Charlotte stopped restocking. "Behind what?" "The complaints, the inspections." Gloria laid a card from her deck onto the table. "There are people in town saying the new girl at the Black Stallion is feeding information to Richard Holloway. That's why she walked in there to begin with. That's the story going around." Charlotte put both hands flat on the bar. "Who's saying that?" "More than one person," Gloria said, "which means it either started with someone connected to Holloway who wants it to spread, or it started inside the club and worked its way out." She looked up from her cards. "Either way, you've got a problem that's not going to solve itself." Charlotte stood still for a moment. Then she picked up the bottles she'd been restocking and finished the row. "Thank you, Gloria," she said. "Don't thank me," Gloria said. "Do something about it." Charlotte thought about Jake watching her the night the clean-cut man had come in and asked too many questions. She thought about the way certain conversations in the bar stopped when she came within range. Not the usual pauses of people who didn't know her well yet, but something more guarded than that. She thought about 3 small looks she'd received over the past 2 weeks and dismissed as paranoia. She had not been paranoid. She found Jake at the pool table that evening, shooting a solo game with the concentration of a man who was using the game to think rather than to play. I need to talk to you, she said. He looked up. Someone's saying I'm behind the inspections, behind the pressure on this place. She didn't qualify it or soften it. I'm not. You need to know that, and you need to decide whether you believe it, because if you don't believe it, tell me now. Jake stood up straight, set the cue down against the table. Who told you, Gloria? He was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite read. How long has that been going around? She asked. I heard it 4 days ago, he said. First time. From who, Yisun? Someone I trust. And what did you decide? He looked at her. Not the way he'd looked at her before, when she was still a variable to be assessed. Something had changed in the quality of his attention, though she couldn't have said precisely when that change had happened. I hadn't decided, he said. That's the honest answer. Charlotte held his gaze. Then decide now, because I can't work in a place where the people I'm working with aren't sure whether I'm their problem or their employee. You're not just an employee. Then act like it. The words landed between them in the particular way that direct words land when both people know they're true. Jake picked up the pool cue again, set it back down. I don't think you did it, he said. Why not? Because people who come in to cause damage don't work like you work. They hold back. They keep their distance. They make sure they've got an exit. He paused. You've been all the way in from your first day. Charlotte felt something release in her chest that had been knotted for days. Then help me figure out who did. That was when the conversation changed. That was when it became something else. Because Jake was quiet for exactly the wrong amount of time. Not the quiet of someone thinking. The quiet of someone deciding how much to say. What do you already know? Charlotte asked. He looked at her. Then he pulled out the chair across from the pool table and sat down in it. And something about that, the sitting down, the decision to stop standing at a distance, told her that what was coming next was significant. Information's been getting out for about 5 months, he said, before you came. Details about club business that only members should know. Small things, mostly schedules, who was coming and going, what conversations happened in the back room. Nothing that caused direct harm, but enough to make someone uncomfortable. Enough to feel like someone was keeping score. Charlotte sat down across from him, and nobody knew who it was. We had suspicions. Nothing solid. He clasped his hands together, looked at the floor briefly. The inspections started about the same time, and when they started coming faster, Marcus figured Holloway had someone feeding him information, not just general town gossip, specific information. And then I showed up. And then you showed up, he said, and it was easy, too easy. The new person always looks like the answer. But it wasn't me. No, he said, I don't think it was you. Then who? Jake was quiet again. This time the quiet had a different texture. The texture of something that hurt. There's someone I keep coming back to, he said. Someone who would have had access to everything that's been getting out. Someone who... He stopped. Someone who has a reason, Charlotte said carefully. Everyone has a reason, Jake said. That's not what makes it hard. She waited. It's someone who's been in this club for 15 years, he said. Someone who was at my brother's funeral. Someone who helped me move when I lost my place in 2019. He looked up at her. It's different when it's someone like that. Yes, Charlotte said, it is. They sat in that for a moment. Does Marcus know what you're thinking? She asked. No, I don't have proof. I'm not going to take a suspicion about someone I've known 15 years to Marcus without something real. Charlotte nodded slowly. Okay, then we get something real. Jake looked at her. We. You said I'm not just an employee, she said. That goes both ways. Something shifted in Jake Dawson's face. Not dramatically, but it was the first time she had seen something that might have been in a different man with fewer defenses called relief. She went back to the bar. She went back to her job. But now she was paying attention with both layers of herself, the one that was learning the rhythms and faces and habits of a place she was starting to call her own, and the one that was quietly, carefully trying to understand what was underneath the surface of the things she'd walked into. The next 2 weeks were dense with information. She paid attention to everything which was different from watching. Watching implied distance. What she was doing was absorbing the way bartenders absorb the texture of a room, the energy between people, the things that go unsaid because the space between words often holds more than the words themselves. She noticed that the leaks, when she thought about them, carefully followed a pattern. They were heaviest on Thursday evenings, and on Thursday evenings, without fail, one particular member was always in the back room for the portion of the evening when the most significant conversations happened. His name was Derek Vaughn. She'd noticed Derek before in the way she'd noticed all the regulars. He was in his early 40s, heavyset with the kind of face that was built for laughing and had somewhere along the line stopped being used for it. He was kind to her in the way that people are kind when they're preoccupied with something that has nothing to do with you. He tipped well. He said please and thank you. He looked most of the time like a man holding himself very carefully over something that was breaking underneath him. She didn't say anything to Jake yet. She had a pattern, not proof, and she understood the difference. What she needed was something to turn the pattern into a fact. It came unexpectedly on a Saturday night. The bar was full, 40 people, maybe more, and the noise level was the kind that bounced off the walls and made it hard to hear specifics from more than 3 feet away. Charlotte was working fast the way she liked working, the rhythm of a busy bar, familiar and almost meditative when she got deep enough into it. Derek was at the bar near the end of the night. He'd had more to drink than usual. Not falling down drunk, he was too careful for that, but loose around the edges in a way that she hadn't seen before. She set a glass of water in front of him without being asked. He looked at it, looked at her, and she saw it just for a second behind his eyes in the space between what a person shows and what they actually feel, something that was very close to gratitude and very close to shame at the same time. "You doing okay?" she asked, quietly, not making anything of it. His jaw tightened. "Fine." "Okay," she said and moved on. But 2 minutes later, when she came back to his end of the bar, he said without looking at her, "How do you know when you've made a mistake you can't take back?" Charlotte stopped moving. She leaned her forearms on the bar, which put her at his eye level, and waited. "You asking in general," she said, "or specifically?" He stared at the washer glass. "My daughter's sick," he said. The words came out flat, like he was reporting them rather than living inside them. "Has been for 8 months. The kind of sick that doesn't get better on its own and costs more money than I've got and more than I can borrow from anywhere that doesn't have a price I'm not willing to pay." He paused. "Except I paid it anyway." Charlotte felt the full weight of what he was saying settle over her. She didn't move. She didn't speak. "I needed money," he said, "a lot of it fast. And someone offered it to me, and I knew what they were going to want in exchange, and I told myself it was small things, just small things. Nobody was going to get hurt. It was just information." He stopped. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. "How much does she need?" she asked. Not what Charlotte had expected to come out of her own mouth, but it came out anyway. Derek finally looked at her. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had not slept properly in a very long time. "Enough that it doesn't matter," he said. "Tell me who you've been talking to," she said. Gently, not like an accusation, like a person extending a hand. He flinched. "I'm not going to go straight to Marcus," she said. "I promise you that, but I need to know what we're dealing with, what Holloway has and what he plans to do with it." Derek's whole body tightened at the name. "How did you—" "Because it's the only thing that makes sense," she said. "He wants this building, he needs the club out, and he needed someone inside." Derek looked down at the bar surface. "He's filing with the county next week," he said. "A formal complaint, the kind that triggers a mandatory review of the operating license. If the review goes badly, and he's made sure it'll go badly, the bar loses its license to operate. Marcus has to either pay Holloway's price or shut down." Charlotte felt the information land like a stone dropped into still water rings moving outward in every direction. "What did he pay you?" she asked. Not to judge, just to understand the shape of the thing. $14,000 over 5 months, Derek said. "My daughter needs one more surgery, the last one. After that, the doctors say she'll be stable." His voice broke on the last word, just barely a single crack in something he'd been holding absolutely still. "I didn't know it would go this far. I thought I was giving him scheduling information, routine things. I didn't know he was going to use it to file official complaints. I didn't know until 3 months in when he started showing me the complaint filings, and I realized—" He stopped again. "I realized what I was a part of." "But you kept going," Charlotte said. Not cruelly, just honestly. She's my daughter, he said. She's 17 years old and she's sick and I kept going. Charlotte straightened up. She took a breath. I need you to do something, she said. And it's hard, and it's going to feel worse before it gets better. But I need you to keep a record. Everything Holloway asked you for, everything you gave him, every payment, every communication. I need you to document it. Derek looked at her. Why? Because right now he has leverage over you. And the only way to get it back is to have leverage over him. Derek's hands were flat on the bar. She could see them pressing down, the knuckles whitening slightly. And Marcus, he said. Marcus doesn't know yet, she said, but he's going to have to know eventually. I can't promise you how that goes. What I can promise is that you coming forward with documentation is a different conversation than you being found out. He was quiet for a long time. I'm not a bad person, he said finally. Charlotte looked at him. She thought about every door that had closed in her face over 6 weeks, about sleeping in her truck because the motel was too expensive, about the moment outside the Black Stallion when fear was still the loudest voice, and she had walked in anyway. I know that, she said, but you've done a bad thing. And those aren't the same, but they're not completely separate either. The question is, what comes next? Derek picked up the water glass, drank from it slowly, set it down. I'll get you the records, he said, everything. She nodded once. Thank you. She served 12 more customers that night. She wiped down the bar and counted the register and did everything that the end of a shift required, and she did it with her hands steady and her face even and no indication of the thing that had just happened at the end of the bar. Jake was the last to leave. He helped carry out the recycling the way he'd started doing without being asked sometime in the past 2 weeks, as natural as if he'd always done it. At the back door he stopped. You look like you found something, he said. Charlotte considered him. Jake Dawson, who had watched her from the beginning with the eyes of a man who had been let down too many times to make assumptions about who would stay. Jake, who had left a cup of coffee warming on the bar at 5:45 in the morning without saying a word about it. I found something, she said. Good or bad? Both, she said. Can we talk tomorrow? He studied her for a moment. 6:30, he said, before anyone else comes in. She nodded. He left. She locked the back door and turned off the lights and sat down on a bar stool in the dark for 5 minutes alone in the bar that 31 years ago Marcus Callahan had poured the first drink in. She thought about Derek Vaughn's daughter, 17 years old and sick. She thought about Richard Holloway's complaint ready to be filed. She thought about Marcus, who had given her one chance when nobody else would. She thought about the fact that the person who had been feeding information to the enemy was not a villain. He was a father, and that changed everything about how this had to be handled. Because if she went at this wrong, if she let anger or urgency or a desire for clean resolution override the complicated human truth of what Derek had told her, she would destroy someone who was already being destroyed by something he couldn't control. She had come to the Black Stallion as someone who needed a chance. She was not going to solve this problem by taking chances away from other people. She stood up, turned off the last light, and walked out into the desert night. And the air was cool and enormous and full of stars, and somewhere behind her, the Black Stallion bar stood in the dark with 31 years of history inside its walls. She was going to make sure it had more. Jake was already there when Charlotte arrived at 6:28. He had 2 coffees on the bar, both black, and he was sitting on the customer's side of the counter rather than behind it, which was unusual enough that it told her something about his state of mind before she'd even sat down. Jake Dawson behind the bar meant Jake at a professional distance. Jake on the customer side meant Jake choosing to meet her as an equal. She sat down next to him and picked up the coffee. Derek Vaughn, she said. She watched his face. He went very still. The way a man goes still when he hears the name he's been afraid to say out loud. How long have you known? She asked. Suspected, he said. Not known. There's a difference. He picked up his own coffee. 3 months, maybe? Little things. The timing of certain leaks matched up with things Derek would have been present for. But suspected isn't proof, and Derek has been in this club longer than some of these guys have been alive. He told me last night, Charlotte said. Jake set the coffee cup down. Hard enough that it sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. He told you. He'd been drinking. Not enough to use as an excuse, but enough to make the weight of it too much to keep holding. She paused. His daughter is sick. Seriously sick. He needed money fast, and Holloway found that need and used it. Jake was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that meant he was doing something difficult inside himself, rearranging things that had been sitting in one position for a longish time into a shape that could accommodate new information. How much, he asked. 14,000, over 5 months. And how much more does she need? Charlotte looked at him. That's the first question you asked. I have a niece, Jake said simply, and that was all he said about that. One more surgery, Charlotte said. After that, she should stabilize. Jake nodded slowly. He picked up the coffee again and held it without drinking. What does he have? What did he actually give Holloway? Schedules, routines, who comes and goes when Marcus is here, when the back room is in use. The kind of information that looks innocent on its own but maps the whole operation if you collect enough of it. She turned the coffee cup in her hands, and Holloway's using it to build a paper case. The inspections weren't random. He knew exactly when to send them and what to have his people look for. He has someone in the county permitting office, I'd guess, because the timing is too precise to be coincidence. The complaint that's coming, Jake said. The license review. Derek told me last night Holloway's filing next week. A formal operational complaint that triggers a mandatory review process. If the review goes the way Holloway's arranged for it to go, Marcus loses the license. Jake stood up. He walked 3 steps away from the bar and then came back, which Charlotte had come to recognize as what Jake Dawson did when he needed to move, but had nowhere specific to go. Marcus needs to know, he said. Yes, Charlotte said, he does, but Derek needs to be the one to tell him. Jake stopped moving. Derek, if it comes from me or from you or from anyone other than Derek, it's a story about a traitor. If it comes from Derek with everything he has documented, with the full picture of what he did and why and what Holloway has built, then it's a different story. It's evidence. It's a weapon we can actually use. Jake stared at her. You're asking me to wait. I'm asking you to wait 48 hours, she said. Derek said he'll get me the records. Everything, texts, payment records, whatever Holloway sent him. 48 hours and we walk into Marcus's office with something that doesn't just expose the problem. It solves it. Jake's jaw worked. She could see the war on his face, the loyalty to Marcus, fighting against the logic of what she was saying, and underneath both of those, something older and more personal, the particular grief of learning that someone you trusted has broken something that can't be unbroken. If Marcus finds out we sat on this, Jake said. Tell him I asked you to, Charlotte said. Put it on me. I'm the one who made the call. Jake looked at her for a long moment. Why are you doing this, he said. You could have come in here this morning and told Marcus everything and let it fall however it falls. Why are you protecting Derek? Charlotte thought about it honestly before she answered. Because he's not a bad person who did a bad thing for bad reasons. He's a person who ran out of options and made a terrible choice for the only reason that makes a person do something they know is wrong. She paused. I understand running out of options. Jake held her gaze. Something moved through his expression that she hadn't seen there before. Not softness exactly. Jake Dawson was not a soft man, and nothing about him suggested he was going to become one, but something adjacent to it, something that recognized something. 48 hours, he said. 48 hours, she confirmed. She called Derek from the parking lot at 7:15 before anyone else arrived for the day. He answered on the second ring, which told her he hadn't slept. I need everything you told me about last night, she said. All of it organized and documented. Can you do that? There was a pause on the line. I already started, he said. Couldn't sleep. I've been up since 3. Good. Bring it to me tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock before the bar opens. Another pause. Charlotte. His voice had something complicated in it. Why are you helping me? I'm helping Marcus, she said, and I'm helping this place. You happen to be the way that happens. A beat. But yes, I'm also helping you. She hung up and went back inside to open the bar. The next 24 hours were among the most difficult Charlotte had experienced since arriving in Silver Creek, and that was saying something given that she had spent 2 weeks sleeping in her truck. The difficulty wasn't physical. It was the particular tension of knowing something that everyone around you doesn't know, of moving through ordinary interactions while carrying extraordinary information, of smiling at customers and taking orders and making change, while inside your chest, something is wound very, very tight. Marcus came in at 8 as he always did. He poured himself coffee, exchanged his usual morning nod, with Charlotte, reviewed the previous day's receipts and went to the back office. Watching him walk back there, the measured, deliberate way Marcus Callahan moved through his own space, the way a man moves when he's spent decades being exactly where he's supposed to be, Charlotte felt a pang of something she didn't have an immediate word for. It landed somewhere between guilt and protectiveness and resolve. He didn't know yet. By tomorrow morning he would. The day moved the way days do when you want them to accelerate and they refuse. Customers came. Charlotte worked. Jake came in at noon, and they didn't speak about anything that mattered, which was a kind of communication in itself. He ordered his lunch, she brought it, their eyes met once, and that was enough. At 3 in the afternoon, something happened that Charlotte hadn't accounted for. Richard Holloway walked into the Black Stallion bar. She recognized him before anyone introduced him because he was exactly who he looked like, a man in his mid-50s who had spent enough money on his appearance to make it look like he hadn't spent the money with the particular confidence of someone who was accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his presence. He came in with one other man younger carrying a leather folder, and they sat at the bar rather than a table, which was a choice designed to put Charlotte directly in front of them. She walked over. "What can I get you?" she said, not a question, the way she'd learned to say it in a busy bar, flat and efficient. Holloway looked at her with the measured interest of someone assessing an asset. "2 waters," he said. "And is Marcus Callahan available?" "I'll check," she said. She set the waters down and walked to the back without hurrying. Marcus was at his desk. She knocked once and opened the door. "Richard Holloway is at the bar," she said, "asking for you." Marcus didn't react the way she expected him to react. He didn't stiffen or flush or do any of the things that might indicate surprise. He set down his pen deliberately, pushed back his chair deliberately, and stood up with the same measured control he brought to everything. "How many with him?" he said. "1." Marcus nodded once. "Come with me." That surprised her. She followed him back out to the bar. Holloway stood when Marcus came out, which was the move of a man who had been taught that standing indicated respect, but had never fully understood what respect actually felt like. He extended his hand. Marcus looked at it for exactly 1 beat before shaking it. "Richard," Marcus said. "Marcus, thanks for coming out." Holloway smiled. The smile didn't reach anything behind it. "This is my associate, Glenn." Glenn nodded. Charlotte noted that Glenn's leather folder was held the way people hold things they want you to notice. "I'll get to it," Holloway said. "I know you're busy. I wanted to come by in person because I think there's been some friction between us that we could clear up if we just talk directly." "Is that what there's been?" Marcus said. "Not a question." Holloway spread his hands slightly, an open gesture. Practiced. "I know there have been some inspection issues, some compliance notices. I want you to know that had nothing to do with me." The bar had gotten quieter. Not silent, Charlotte had learned that the Black Stallion's ambient noise never went fully silent while there were people in it, but the quality of the sound had changed. People were listening without appearing to listen. "County Health and County Fire do their own scheduling," Holloway continued. "I have no control over that." "No," Marcus said. "Of course not." Charlotte watched Marcus's face. It was the most controlled face she had ever observed in operation. Whatever he knew or suspected or felt about Richard Holloway was completely inaccessible from the outside. "My offer stands," Holloway said. "It's a good offer. Fair market value plus 15%, which in the current climate is not something I'm offering everyone." He paused. "The development plan for this block is going forward regardless. There's going to be construction. Noise access changes traffic patterns, things that would make running a bar here significantly more complicated than it is now." "Thank you for the warning," Marcus said. Holloway's smile didn't waver, but something behind it tightened slightly. "I'm not warning you, Marcus. I'm informing you. There's a difference." "There is," Marcus agreed, a beat of silence. "The offer has a timeline," Holloway said. "End of the month. After that, circumstances may change in ways that affect the value proposition." Marcus looked at him. "Thank you for coming by, Richard." That was it. That was the whole of it. Holloway held the smile for another second, nodded to Glenn, and they left their untouched waters on the bar and walked out. The bar's ambient noise normalized within 30 seconds. Marcus stood still for a moment. Then he picked up one of the water glasses and turned it in his hands. "He came in person," he said quietly. "He wanted to see the place," Charlotte said, just as quietly. "See who was here. what kind of shape things were in. Marcus looked at her. What do you think Charlotte thought about the leather folder Glenn had been holding? The timeline Holloway had mentioned. The filing Derek said was coming next week. I think he's more confident than he should be, she said, and men are only that confident when they think they already know the outcome. Marcus set the glass down. His eyes stayed on her for a long moment. You know something, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the statement of a man who had spent 31 years reading rooms and people in the space between what was said and what was real. Charlotte made the hardest call she'd made since she arrived in Silver Creek. Give me until tomorrow morning, she said. 6 o'clock. I need one more night. Marcus held her gaze. She didn't look away from it. She let him read whatever was there to be read because she had nothing to hide from him except the thing she was asking for one more night to handle correctly. 6 o'clock, he said. She nodded. He went back to the office. She went back to the bar and worked the rest of the shift with her hands steady and her face even and her mind running calculations she couldn't share with anyone. Derek arrived at 5:58 the next morning. He looked like a man who had spent the night dismantling something and reassembling it, not because the reassembly was possible, but because he needed to do something with his hands while he waited to find out what happened next. He was carrying a manila envelope. Charlotte was behind the bar. Jake was on a bar stool. They hadn't coordinated that Jake had simply arrived at 5:45 earlier than she'd expected and taken a seat without explanation. Derek stopped in the doorway when he saw Jake. The three of them held that moment for a full breath. Sit down, Derek, Charlotte said. He came to the bar slowly. He sat down. He set the envelope on the counter and put his hand on top of it and didn't move it. How much does your daughter's surgery cost? Jake said. Derek looked at him. The question had clearly not been what he was braced for. 11,000, he said. Insurance is covering part of it now. They weren't before, but my case manager got them to reconsider. I still need 11,000 out of pocket. Jake nodded once. He didn't say anything else about it. Derek looked down at the envelope. Everything's in there, he said. Every communication. Screenshots of every text message Holloway or his people sent me. Payment records. He used a Cash App. I kept the receipts. A log I kept of every piece of information I gave him with dates. And he stopped, took a breath, and a written statement. What happened, why, how it started, and how I tried to tell myself it was manageable, and when I understood it wasn't. Charlotte took the envelope. Marcus is going to be here in 2 hours, she said. Derek nodded. His hands were clasped on the bar in front of him, white-knuckled. Do you want me to be here when you talk to him? Charlotte asked. He's going to want to know why I told you instead of him, Derek said. Then tell him the truth, Jake said. You told her because she asked you the right question at the right time. He paused. That's not a small thing. Derek looked at Jake for a long moment. Are you going to say anything before Marcus comes in? About what you thought of me before you had the evidence? No, Jake said simply. You can tell him whatever you need to tell him. What I thought isn't the story. Derek's jaw tightened. He looked down again. I'm sorry, he said, to both of them, to the bar, to something larger than either of them, that he couldn't address directly. I know, Charlotte said. Marcus arrived at 7:58. He came through the back door, as always, poured himself coffee, as always, and then came out into the bar and found the three of them sitting there and stopped. His eyes went from Charlotte to Jake to Derek. He read the room the way Marcus always read rooms, quickly, completely, without asking for help interpreting it. He sat down. He looked at Derek. Derek opened his mouth and closed it. Tried again. I need to tell you something, Derek said, and I need you to hear all of it before you decide what it means. Marcus said nothing. He waited, and Derek told him, in all of it. His voice broke twice, once when he said his daughter's name, and once at the end when he said, I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I kept doing it because I couldn't find another way, and I understand if that's not something you can get past. Marcus had not moved during any of it. He sat with his coffee cup in front of him untouched, and his face did the thing it did best, which was reveal nothing from the outside while processing everything within. When Derek finished, the silence ran long. Charlotte watched Marcus. She watched him take one slow breath. How's she doing? Marcus said. Your daughter. Derek blinked. He stopped. She's better than she was. The last round of treatment helped. She's scared, but she's fighting. Marcus nodded. 11,000, he said. It wasn't a question. He'd heard the number. Marcus, Derek started. Stop, Marcus said, not harshly, just with finality. Don't tell me not to. That's between me and the club, and it doesn't require your permission. Derek looked like a man who had been bracing for impact and was trying to understand why the impact hadn't come in the form he'd expected. The other thing, Marcus said, and his voice changed, then got quieter and harder at the same time, is that you went to Holloway instead of coming to me. Not because I didn't care, but because you didn't think I could help. Derek looked down. I've known you 15 years, Marcus said. You didn't trust me enough to ask. I know, Derek said. That's what I need you to sit with, Marcus said. Not the money, not even what you gave him. You didn't ask. The weight of that landed in the room differently than anything else that had been said, because it was true and specific, and it cut to the thing that mattered most, not the betrayal of information, but the betrayal of trust in the other direction, Derek not trusting Marcus enough to come to him with the worst thing that had ever happened to him. Charlotte looked at the envelope she was still holding. The documentation Derek put together, Holloway's text, the payment records, the log. It shows a coordinated campaign to use paid information to file regulatory complaints against a licensed business. That's tortious interference at minimum, potentially extortion, depending on how the filing next week is structured. Marcus looked at her. If we get this to the right attorney before Holloway files, she said we can have an injunction ready. We can make the filing itself the evidence of the scheme. She paused. He walks in thinking he's dropping the hammer. Instead, he hands us the case. Jake leaned forward. You've been thinking about this. Since Tuesday, she said. Marcus picked up his coffee cup, drank from it finally, set it down. I know an attorney in Tucson, he said. We've worked with her before. She's good and she's fast. How fast? Charlotte asked. If I call her this morning, she can have a preliminary review done by end of day. He looked at the envelope. Give me that. Charlotte handed it over. Marcus held it without opening it. He looked at Derek. You're going to have to talk to her, give a statement, answer questions. I know, Derek said. And you're going to have to tell the chapter, Marcus said. Not me, you, in a room with all of them. What you did and why. Derek went pale. Marcus, that's not negotiable, Marcus said. Not because I want to punish you, because you owe them the truth, and the only way this holds together is if it comes from you. Derek closed his eyes, opened them. Okay, Marcus said. He stood up, and there was something in the way he moved that said the decision was made, the direction was set, and the time for sitting still was over. He looked at Charlotte. How did you know to trust him when he told you saw him? Charlotte thought about it. I didn't know, she said. I decided to. Marcus studied her for a moment with the particular attention he'd given her on that very first day standing across the bar from each other with her resume between them. The quality of it was the same, not warm exactly, but complete. She had the feeling, not for the first time, of being seen in a way that most people never bothered to look. All right, he said. He picked up the envelope and went back toward the office. In the doorway, he stopped without turning around. Charlotte? Yeah, she said. Good work, he said. He went into the office and closed the door. The three of them remaining at the bar exhaled in near unison. Jake looked at Charlotte. She looked back at him. Derek was staring at the bar surface with the expression of a man who has just set down something very heavy and is still adjusting to the absence of the weight. It's not over, Charlotte said, not to be discouraging, just because it was true. No, Jake agreed, but it's different now. It was different. By 9 o'clock, Marcus had reached his attorney, a woman named Rosa Gutierrez, who had a fast, precise manner on the phone that Charlotte could hear from across the room, and who said words like preliminary injunction and tortious interference and pattern of regulatory abuse in a tone that suggested these were not hypotheticals, but plans. By noon, Rosa had reviewed Derek's documentation and called back to say it was solid, specific, and exactly the kind of evidence that tended to make the opposing side reconsider their timeline. By 2 in the afternoon, the mood in the bar had shifted. Charlotte couldn't have said exactly how it shifted, because nobody had made an announcement. Nobody had gathered the chapter for a briefing. But the people who came through the Black Stallion door between 2 and 6 could feel something had changed in the atmosphere. The way you feel when weather is coming, but hasn't arrived yet. A particular charged quality to the air, a sense of something enormous moving in the distance. And then at 4:15, Charlotte's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She stepped to the back hallway to answer it. The voice on the other end was smooth, unhurried, and familiar from the 2 glasses of untouched water it had ordered the day before. "Ms. Miller," Richard Holloway said, "I understand you have been busy." Charlotte's pulse jumped once. She held the phone steady. "Mr. Holloway, I think we should talk," he said. "You and I directly. I can come to you or you can come to me, your preference." "What would we be talking about?" "About what's best for everyone involved," he said, "including you." A pause that was calibrated to feel significant. "You've built something at that bar. 3 months in, already making yourself indispensable. That's a real skill. A skill like that has value in a lot of different places." Charlotte understood exactly what she was being told. She was being offered a bomb, an exit from the Black Stallion dressed up as an opportunity. She was being warned. "I appreciate the call," she said. "I'll let Marcus know you reached out." A pause, longer this time, less calculated. "You should think carefully," Holloway said, "about where your interests actually lie." "I have been," she said. "I know exactly where they lie." She ended the call. She stood in the hallway for a moment with the phone in her hand and her heart going faster than she wanted it to. Not from fear exactly. From something that felt more like the combination of adrenaline and absolute clarity that she imagined soldiers talked about, the moment when everything goes very still and very simple because the situation has reduced itself to a single question with a single answer. She went back to the bar. Jake was watching her from across the room. He had read her face before she'd said a word. "Holloway," he said. "He knows we have something," she said. "He called to offer me a way out." Jake went very still. "I didn't take it," she said. Something in Jake's face shifted. Just briefly. Just enough. "He's going to move faster now," she said. "Whatever he was planning for next week, the filing the complaint, he might push it up." "Then we push up our timeline too," Jake said. He stood up. "I'll get Marcus." He went to the back office. Charlotte stood behind the bar and looked at the room around her. The tables, the worn bar surface, the photographs pinned to the wall above the register, 31 years of a place that had been built by people who showed up every day and meant it. Marcus came out of the office with his phone to his ear, already talking. Derek was behind him, looking pale, but present, which Charlotte thought was probably the most important thing he could do right now. The bar had an hour before it opened for the evening. They were going to use every minute of it because Richard Holloway had just made his most significant mistake. He had called Charlotte Miller to offer her a way out, which told her with absolute certainty that he was afraid of what she had. And a man who is afraid has already started losing, even if he doesn't know it yet. Rosa Gutierrez called back at 4:47. Marcus had her on speaker, the phone flat on the bar between him and Charlotte, and Jake Derrick standing slightly back from the group in the way of a man who understood he was still earning his place in the circle. "I've reviewed everything," Rosa said. Her voice had the same quality it had on the phone that morning. Fast, precise, no wasted syllables. "Derek's documentation is clean. The payment trail is clear. The message logs are time-stamped and consistent, and the log he kept of what information he passed and when is detailed enough to establish pattern. What we have is a documented, coordinated campaign to use paid intelligence to manufacture regulatory violations against a licensed business. That's tortious interference with a business relationship, and depending on how the filing next week is structured, it could cross into extortion territory." "Could cross," Marcus said. "Will cross," Rosa said. "If Holloway files the complaint using information he obtained through a paid source without disclosing that relationship to the county. That's fraud on the regulatory process, different animal entirely." Charlotte watched Marcus absorb this. He was standing with his arms crossed, and his face in its default configuration controlled unreadable processing everything and showing nothing. But she had spent enough time reading that face to notice the very small shift that happened when he heard the word fraud. Not satisfaction. Something colder and more purposeful than satisfaction. "What do we need to do before he files?" Charlotte asked. "2 things," Rosa said. "First, I need Derek's signed statement by tomorrow morning. Notarized original signature. Second, I'm going to file for a preliminary injunction this afternoon. Motion to enjoin Holloway from filing any regulatory complaint related to the Black Stallion, pending an investigation into the source of his information. If the judge grants it, Holloway can't file until the investigation clears. If he files anyway, he's in contempt. And if the judge doesn't grant it, Jake said, then we're in reactive mode, Rosa said. We respond to the complaint with Derek's documentation as our counter evidence, and we argue the complaint is fraudulently sourced. It's a longer fight, but it's winnable. A pause. I'd rather not fight it that way. The injunction is cleaner. How fast can you file? Marcus said. I'm filing in 2 hours, Rosa said. I need one thing from you first. I need you to tell me whether Holloway called anyone at that bar today. Directly. Any attempt to communicate with you or your staff after you retain me would be relevant to establishing consciousness of guilt. Marcus looked at Charlotte. Charlotte told Rosa about the phone call, the offer, the warning dressed up as an opportunity. She gave it to Rosa in the same flat factual way she'd have recounted it to anyone what was said, how it was said, what she understood it to mean. Rosa was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. He called your bartender to offer her a way out after he became aware you might have the documentation. Yes, Charlotte said. That, Rosa said, is going to be very useful. Another pause shorter. Charlotte, I'm going to need a written account of that call. Timed his exact words as best you can recall them. Your response is the tone. Can you do that in the next hour? I'm starting it now, Charlotte said. Marcus ended the call. The bar was quiet around them for a moment. Not the quiet of a place that was empty, but the particular quiet of a place where everyone had stopped pretending to do something else and was simply present in the weight of what had just been decided. Charlotte picked up a notepad from behind the bar and started writing. Jake watched her for a moment. Then he said to no one in particular, she called him before she was even asked. Nobody responded, but Derek looked up from the bar surface where he'd been staring and watched Charlotte write, and something in his expression shifted from the hollow guilt he'd been carrying all morning into something that looked cautiously like it might eventually become hope. Marcus put his hand briefly on the bar. We open in 40 minutes, he said. Normal evening, nothing changes on the outside. He looked at each of them in turn. Whatever Holloway's people are watching for, they don't see anything different tonight. Normal evening. Charlotte translated that immediately into its practical meaning and started moving, pulling bottles, checking ice, running through the prep list. She could do in her sleep by now. The rhythm of it helped. Her hands knew what to do while her mind kept turning over the call, replaying Holloway's voice. The smoothness of it, the way a man sounds when he's accustomed to people hearing an offer, and taking it without asking too many questions. She had not taken it. He had not expected that. That gap between his expectation and her response was where everything that came next was going to happen. The evening crowd came in the way it always did, gradually, then all at once, the bar filling from a handful of regulars to 40 people by 7 o'clock. Charlotte worked. She talked when talking was required and was quiet when quiet served better. And she watched the room the way she always watched it, tracking the currents and temperatures and small signals that told her when something was building. At 7:30, something built. A man came in she hadn't seen before. Clean cut, not the kind of face that belonged in the Black Stallion without a reason. He sat at a table rather than the bar and ordered a beer he didn't drink and looked at his phone with the specific concentration of someone who was being paid to be in a particular place at a particular time. Charlotte caught Jake's eye across the room, tilted her head toward the man by 2 degrees. Jake looked back at her, gave the smallest nod she'd ever seen a human being produce. He worked his way around the room in the gradual, purposeful way that didn't look like working his way anywhere, and ended up at a table 2 removed from the stranger, engaged in a conversation with 2 other members that looked completely natural and probably wasn't. The stranger stayed 40 minutes. He took 2 photographs on his phone, both angled toward the bar, and left his untouched beer on the table with a 20 beside it. After he left, Jake came back to the bar. He's building a record, he said quietly, trying to document something he can use. Overcrowding, maybe. Or proximity to a complaint he hasn't filed yet. He's counting on us not knowing, Charlotte said. He's counting on a lot of things that aren't working out for him, Jake said. At 8:15, Marcus's phone rang. He was in the back office and Charlotte heard his footsteps stop, heard the quality of the silence that followed the call, which was different from normal silence in the way that all meaningful silences are different from empty ones. He came out 2 minutes later. Rosa filed the injunction, he said. Judge is reviewing tonight. We'll have an answer by morning. The bar continued around them. Someone put money in the jukebox. 2 members at the pool table laughed at something. Pete sent out a plate of wings to a table that hadn't ordered them because Pete expressed care through food and always had. Charlotte thought about Holloway somewhere in Tucson or in a hotel in Silver Creek, receiving word through whatever channels he used that something had been filed. She thought about the moment of that landing, the calculation that would follow, the reassessment. She hoped it felt the way standing outside the Black Stallion had felt for her that first day. She hoped it felt like a door that had been expected to open, that had in fact been arranged to open, had instead stayed shut. She was still thinking about that at 9 o'clock when the front door opened and a man walked in who made every conversation in the room stop. Not the way Charlotte's entrance had stopped the room 3 months ago, not with the silence of surprise, with something harder than that, with the silence of recognition and of something unresolved. He was maybe 60 big in the way of a man who had been bigger once and still carried the architecture of it in his frame with a road-worn face and the kind of eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being impressed by most of it. He was wearing a Hell's Angels cut, but not the Silver Creek chapter. Different patches. Charlotte didn't know enough to read them exactly, but she knew enough to understand that this was someone senior. Someone whose presence meant something outside the ordinary rhythm of the bar. Marcus came out to the back office without being called. The two men looked at each other across the length of the room. "Frank, Boris," Marcus said. "Marcus?" The man named Frank walked to the bar and sat down. He did not look at anyone else. "I heard you had some trouble." "Where'd you hear that?" "Word travels," Frank said simply. Charlotte set a glass in front of him. He looked at her with the brief, complete attention of someone doing an assessment and then back at Marcus. "Who's this?" "Charlotte Miller," Marcus said. "She works here." Frank looked at her again, this time with more of whatever the first look had been. "You the one who found the leak?" Charlotte glanced at Marcus. Marcus gave her the smallest indication, not a nod, barely a shift, that said answer him. "I found part of it," she said. "Derek found most of it himself." Frank considered that. "And you're the one Holloway called?" "He called my cell, yes." "After you lawyered up?" "About 2 hours after." Frank picked up glass sheet set in front of him, looked at it, set it down. He had the quality of a man who made decisions by settling into stillness and waiting for the noise to fall away until only the decision was left. "He does this," Frank said. "Not just here. Holloway's been working this play in 4 towns across the state over the past 8 years. Find a property he wants. Find leverage on someone inside the operation. Use the inside access to build a regulatory case. Apply pressure until the owner sells or folds." He looked at Marcus. 3 of those 4 operations are gone. The bar had gone very quiet again. "What happened to the 4th?" Jake said from across the room. Frank looked at him. "They got out ahead of it," he said. "Found a lawyer who knew what to look for. Built a counter case before Holloway could finish building his." A pause. "Sound familiar?" "Sounds exactly familiar," Marcus said. Frank nodded. "There's also something else you should know," he said. He reached into the inside pocket of his cut and produced a folded piece of paper. Set it on the bar. "That's an affidavit from the operation in Flagstaff. They didn't have enough at the time to use it. Holloway's people approached someone in their organization the same way. Paid source, same structure." He looked at Charlotte. "Same phone call, more or less. Offer to help the inside person walk away clean." Charlotte felt the information settle over her. It wasn't surprised she had understood from Holloway's smoothness that this was not his first time. But seeing it confirmed in a document, seeing that the call she'd received was a script he'd used before, made something harden in her chest that she thought was probably useful. "Can Rosa use this?" she asked Marcus. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling her now." Frank watched Marcus go back toward the office. Then he looked at Charlotte. "You're not from here," he said. "Ohio," she said. "How long?" 3 months. He studied her for a moment. "And you walked in here 3 months ago?" "I walked in here 3 months ago," she confirmed. Something shifted in Frank's face. Not dramatically, men like Frank didn't do dramatic, but something moved. "Marcus doesn't bring people in easily," he said. "I know," she said. "I had to convince him." "What did you say?" Charlotte thought about the resume on the bar, the 41 rejections, the truck at the rest stop. "I told him I knew exactly where I was." Frank picked up his glass and drank from it, set it down. "Good answer," he said. "He stayed for an hour. He and Marcus talked in the back office for most of it, and whatever they talked about produced the particular focused quiet that follows when two people who have been doing something for a long time find a way to do it better. By the time the bar closed, they had the affidavit from Flagstaff. Rosa had confirmed she could incorporate it into the injunction filing as supplementary evidence of a pattern, and Frank had made 2 phone calls to people Charlotte didn't know and whose names she wasn't asked to learn, which produced 2 additional documented instances of Holloway using the same approach in different locations across Arizona. 4 towns, same playbook, same phone call. Not this time. The morning came fast. Charlotte hadn't slept well, not from fear, but from the particular alertness that comes when everything is in motion and your body refuses to stand down. She was at the bar at 5:30, which was 30 minutes before she needed to be, and she used the time to go over the written account of Holloway's call that Rosa had asked for, reading it twice to make sure every word was accurate, that nothing she'd put down was inference rather than fact. Jake arrived at 5:50. He looked at her statement on the bar. "Rosa call yet?" he said. "7 minutes ago," Charlotte said. "Judge reviewed the injunction filing last night. He's issuing a ruling at 9 o'clock. Jake sat down. "And if it goes our way, Holloway can't file his complaint today. His timeline collapses. And Rosa starts building the counter case using everything we have, plus the Flagstaff affidavit, plus the pattern documentation." Charlotte folded the statement and set it aside. "He either cuts his losses or he fights it in court, which means everything he's been doing becomes public record." "He won't want that," Jake said. "No," Charlotte agreed. "He won't." Marcus arrived at 7. He was carrying coffee from the place down the street, which he almost never did, which told Charlotte that he had needed the walk this morning. He set a cup in front of her without being asked. She looked at it, looked at him. "3 months ago, you put a resume on my bar," he said. "You remember what I said? You said 3 people had come in for the talk and none of them lasted a full shift. And you said, I said maybe they weren't the right person." Marcus looked at her steadily. "You were right," he said. Charlotte picked up the coffee. It was the right temperature. He'd walked fast. At 8:45, Derek arrived. He looked like a man who had made peace with something difficult and was learning what it felt like to stand upright without the weight. He was carrying his signed statement in an envelope. He set it on the bar. "I talked to the chapter last night," he said, after Marcus called the meeting. His voice was even, which Charlotte suspected cost him more effort than it appeared to. "All of them." Charlotte looked at him. "How did it go?" "About how you'd expect," he said. "Some of them." He stopped, started again. "Some of them were angry. I'd have been angry too. A couple of them left before I finished." He looked down at the envelope. "But most of them stayed. And at the end, Grizzly, who's been in this chapter longer than anyone except Marcus, stood up and said that a man who tells the truth when the truth costs him everything has done more than most people manage." Charlotte felt something move in her chest. "Grizzly said that?" "Word for word," Derek said. She thought about Grizzly, who had tested her on her 3rd day with a glass at the edge of the bar, and nodded once when she'd handled it right. Men like Grizzly didn't say things like that unless they meant them completely. "And the 11,000, she said carefully. Derek was quiet for a moment. "Marcus said the chapter voted on it last night. It's covered." His voice broke on the last word, just barely the same single crack she'd heard from him at the bar 2 nights ago. "All of it. They voted unanimously." Charlotte nodded. She didn't trust herself to say anything for a moment. "I don't know how to," Derek started. "You don't have to," she said. "Just make sure she gets through the surgery." Derek pressed his lips together, nodded. At 9:02, Rosa called. Marcus answered. Speaker again. The same 3 people around it. Derek slightly backed the bar, quiet in the early morning. It was quiet before the world fully started up. "Judge granted the preliminary injunction," Rosa said. "Holloway is enjoined from filing any regulatory complaint related to the Black Stallion Bar or its operations pending a formal investigation into the sourcing of his information. He's being served this morning." Nobody in the room made noise. The information landed in the particular way that the resolution of something long under pressure lands not with a crash, but with a kind of release, like a breath you've been holding so long you forgot you were holding it. Marcus said, "Thank you, Rosa." "We're not finished," Rosa said. "This is the injunction. The investigation is next and then likely civil proceedings. But his filing is stopped and his timeline is broken and everything he's built is now subject to discovery." A pause. He's going to want to settle. Let him want, Marcus said. Rosa almost laughing. I'll be in touch before noon. Marcus ended the call. The bar around them was the Black Stallion at 9:15 in the morning, empty of customers, full of 31 years of a thing that had just been defended. Charlotte looked at the bar surface, worn smooth in the spots where hands had rested for decades, and thought about the first time she'd put her resume on that surface, and the man who'd looked at her like she was something he hadn't expected. Then Holloway's second mistake arrived. Charlotte's phone buzzed at 9:22. Not a call this time. A text from the unknown number, 3 sentences. You made a serious error. This isn't finished. You should leave Silver Creek while leaving is still a comfortable option. She read it twice, showed it to Marcus without a word. Marcus read it. His expression did not change. He took out his own phone and called Rosa back. He just texted my bartender, he said. Threat to leave town, sent from the same number as the call yesterday. Rosa's response was immediate. Screenshot it and send it to me right now. That's witness intimidation after injunction. That's a different category of problem for Mr. Holloway entirely. Charlotte sent the screenshot before Rosa had finished the sentence. Jake was reading over Charlotte's shoulder. She felt him go very still when he read the text. Not the stillness of someone who was afraid, the stillness of someone who had just decided something. He threatened you, Jake said. He tried to, Charlotte said. Jake looked at her. Are you scared? Charlotte thought about it honestly. She thought about her truck at the rest stop, about peanut butter from a jar, about 41 closed doors and the one that had opened. She thought about Holloway's voice on the phone, smooth, practiced, accustomed to people hearing it and adjusting their behavior accordingly. A little, she said, but not the kind that changes what I do. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 3 months ago, I stood at the end of this bar and asked you why we should trust you. I remember, she said. You said the only answer you had was that you'd been here every day and worked hard and kept your mouth shut about things that weren't your business. He paused. That wasn't the only answer. She looked at him. What was the rest of it? The rest of it is this, he said. What you did with Derek, what you did with the documentation, what you did when Holloway called and offered you a way out. He met her gaze directly with the full weight of Jake Dawson's attention, which she had come to understand was not a small thing. You didn't take the easy road once, not one time, from the minute you walked through that door. Charlotte held his gaze. Neither did you, she said. You left a cup of coffee at the end of the bar at 5:45 in the morning for someone you weren't sure yet you could trust. Something happened in Jake's face that she had not seen there before. Not the near smile she'd seen occasionally, not the controlled acknowledgement that served as his version of warmth. Something more open than either of those. Something that looked like a man setting down his guard, not because the threat was gone, but because he had decided the person beside him was worth the risk. I made the coffee at 5:30, he said. I sat here for 15 minutes waiting to see if you'd show up early. Charlotte felt something shift in her chest, warm and complicated. I was there at 5:45. I know, he said. That's why I left it. Marcus came back from the office. He read the room, the two of them at the bar, the particular quality of the air between them, and said nothing about it. He put his phone down on the bar. Rosa's filing the witness intimidation complaint this afternoon, he said. Combined with the injunction violation if he doesn't comply, and the pattern evidence from Flagstaff Holloway's attorney is going to tell him to settle before this gets any uglier. He looked at Charlotte. She wants you available for a call at 2 o'clock. I'll be here, Charlotte said. She also said, Marcus paused, a brief pause that had something in it Charlotte couldn't immediately read. She said whoever organized the documentation and identified the pattern of calls and contacts did very clean work. Said it was the kind of thing that takes training or instinct, and asked which one. Charlotte looked at him. What did you tell her? I told her you walked into my bar in Arizona from Ohio with a resume and nothing else, Marcus said, and figured most of it out in about 3 weeks. Rosa's voice on the 2 o'clock call was even faster than usual, which Charlotte had learned to read as excitement that Rosa was too professional to call excitement, but that showed up in her pace regardless. Holloway's attorney contacted me at 12:40, Rosa said. They want to talk. Marcus said nothing. He was very good at being silent in a way that communicated more than noise would have. They're going to offer a settlement, Rosa said. I don't know the number yet, but they're going to offer one. The witness intimidation text was the thing that broke their confidence. That text puts Holloway personally in the frame for conduct after the injunction was served, which means his attorney can no longer contain this to a business dispute. A pause. It becomes personal liability. He does not want personal liability. What do we ask for? Marcus said. Full withdrawal of all existing regulatory complaints in the pending filing. A release of all claims related to the property for a minimum of 10 years. A payment to cover your legal costs and a portion of the losses from the compliance period. Rosa paused. And I want a non-disparagement clause that runs both directions, which protects the bar and the club from Holloway using this against you in any future context. Will he take it? He'll take some version of it, Rosa said. He wants this to go away quietly. The quieter you let it go, the more he'll give you to buy that quiet. Marcus was still for a moment. Let it go quietly, he said. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't refusal. It was a man weighing something. Charlotte looked at him. She thought about Edna Reardon's roof, about Caleb the mechanic, about all the things the club had done quietly and received nothing for. She thought about the town of Silver Creek that talked about the Hells Angels, the way people talk about something they've decided to fear rather than understand. She thought about the difference between quiet and invisible. Can we ask for one more thing? She said. Rosa waited. Charlotte looked at Marcus. A public statement from Holloway acknowledging that the regulatory complaints were improperly sourced. Not an apology, just a factual acknowledgement. She held Marcus's gaze. On the record. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Rosa, he said, add that. Rosa paused. He may push back on that one. Then we push back harder, Marcus said. We've got the affidavit, the texts, the payments, and a witness intimidation filing. He can afford one sentence acknowledging his complaints were improperly sourced. Another pause. Okay, Rosa said. I'll take it to the table. The call ended. The bar had 20 minutes before the evening crowd started arriving. Charlotte started prepping. Bottles iced the rhythm of getting ready for a night that would look like every other night from the outside while inside the bar. Something had shifted so fundamentally that she wasn't sure the before and after would ever fully connect back together. Jake came behind the bar. This was new. He had never been behind the bar, unless Marcus asked him to help with something specific. He didn't ask her if it was okay. He just came back there and started helping with the ice. They worked side by side for a few minutes without speaking. What happens after? Jake said finally. Not to the room, to her. After the settlement. After all of it, he said. Holloway's gone, the pressure's off. Things go back to normal. He paused. What do you do? Charlotte looked at the bar, at the glasses lined up, at the worn surface where 31 years of people had leaned and talked and worked through whatever they were working through. I keep showing up at 5:45, she said. Jake looked at her sideways. Something in his face that was not quite a smile, but was everything adjacent to one. Yeah. Unless someone stops leaving the coffee, she said. Jake went back to the ice. Nobody's stopping that, he said. The evening crowd came in, the bar filled. The noise rose to its familiar level, and Charlotte moved through it with the ease of someone who had learned the rhythms of a place and made them her own. She knew who took their beer cold, who wanted their glass kept full, without asking who needed a moment before they ordered, who was having a harder week than usual. She knew this room. She knew these people. 3 months ago, she had stood outside this building for 11 minutes, counting them with fear in her stomach and $400 in a dying bank account. She hadn't left. Not when Jake questioned her, not when the rumor spread, not when Holloway called, not when the text came through. She hadn't left, and the bar around her tonight was the evidence of what staying looked like when the cost of it was real. At 10:15, Marcus came to the bar and stood beside her for a moment watching the room with her. Rosa called while you were busy, he said. Holloway's attorney accepted the terms, all of them, including the public statement. Charlotte set down the glass she was drying. All of them. All of them, Marcus said. She's drafting the agreement tonight. We sign by end of week. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. The bar was loud around the music conversation, the particular layered noise of a full room of people who were exactly where they wanted to be. He fought this for 8 years in 4 towns, she said. He did. And then he hit this one. Marcus looked at her. The expression on his face was the one she'd seen only rarely, the one that lived underneath the controlled professional surface. Not soft because Marcus Callahan was not a soft man, but something that was the emotional equivalent of the way strong things sometimes lean just slightly when they've been standing a long time. He hit this one, Marcus agreed. He went back to the office. Charlotte went back to work. And Jake Dawson from across the room caught her eye for exactly 1 second and gave her the smallest nod she had ever seen. She recognized it. It was the same nod Marcus had given her on her very first morning. The nod that meant you're here, you belong here, you've earned this. She picked up the next order and kept moving because there was still a full bar to run and hours left in the night and a room full of people who needed what only she knew how to give them. She had walked in 3 months ago looking for a job. She had found something that didn't have a clean word for it yet, but she was starting to think the word might be home. The settlement papers were signed on a Friday. Rosa drove down from Tucson herself, which Charlotte had not expected. She arrived at 9 in the morning with a leather briefcase and the energy of someone who had won something and was allowing herself exactly the amount of satisfaction that professionalism permitted, which in Rosa's case appeared to be a single firm nod and the closest thing to a smile her courtroom face could produce. Marcus signed at the kitchen table in the back office, the same table where Charlotte had watched him process phone calls and make decisions and carry 31 years of this place on his shoulders without once suggesting it was heavy. He read every page, all 14 of them, before he signed anything, and Rosa let him read without rushing him, which told Charlotte something about the kind of attorney Rosa was. Charlotte witnessed the signature. Jake stood in the doorway. Derek was not there, which was right. His part of this had been played, and Marcus had been clear that Derek's presence at the settlement signing would complicate things for everyone, including Derek. There would be time for the larger reconciliation. This moment belonged to the bar. When Marcus put down the pen, the room held a breath. Then Rosa closed the folder, slid it into her briefcase, and said, Holloway's public statement runs in the Silver Creek Gazette on Monday. His attorney negotiated the wording, but the substance is there. He acknowledges the complaints were sourced improperly and withdraws all pending regulatory actions. She paused. It's not an apology. I didn't ask for an apology, Marcus said. No, Rosa said. You asked for the truth on the record. That's harder to get than an apology in my experience. She stood, shook Marcus's hand, looked at Charlotte. You did good work, she said. The kind of work that's hard to teach. Charlotte said, thank you for moving fast. Rosa smiled, a real one, this time brief but complete. Fast is easier when the evidence is clean. She picked up her briefcase. Don't let anyone build a case against you in the future. We'll try, Charlotte said. Rosa left. Marcus stayed at the table. Charlotte stayed too. Jake came in from the doorway and then sat down, which meant all three of them were seated around the back table in the morning quiet of the closed bar, and nobody said anything for a moment because nobody needed to. Then Marcus said, there's something I want to talk to you about. Charlotte looked at him. I've been running this bar alone since 2019, he said. Carol passed that year, my wife. He said it without the particular weight that fresh grief carries, the way you say things that have moved from wound to fact over time. She used to help with the business side, bookkeeping, supplier relationships, the things I'm not built for. He put both hands flat on the table. I've been managing since then. Not well, adequately. Charlotte said nothing. She could hear where this was going and she didn't want to interrupt it. I need a manager, Marcus said. Not a bartender who also handles things. An actual manager. Someone who knows this place, knows these people, and has the judgment to make calls when I'm not here. He looked at her directly. I'm asking if you want the job. The room was very quiet. Charlotte thought about the resume she'd printed at the library for 15 cents a page. She thought about the parking lot at the rest stop, about the jar of peanut butter, about standing outside this building for 11 minutes, counting fear against survival, and deciding that survival had to win. She thought about Edna Reardon's roof, about Caleb and his 2 missing fingers, about Derek's daughter who was scheduled for surgery in 2 weeks, and who Marcus's chapter was going to make sure came through the other side of it with one less thing to carry. She thought about Jake, who had left coffee at 5:45 and never once mentioned it. Yes, she said. Marcus nodded once. That was Marcus's version of a celebration, and she had learned to receive it as the significant thing it was. Jake said nothing. But when she glanced at him, the expression on his face was the one she'd cataloged and never named, not quite a smile, not quite relief, but everything that lived in the territory between them. Monday, Marcus said. We'll go over everything. Suppliers, accounts, the things that are in my head that need to be written down somewhere. He stood up. Today we opened the bar. They opened the bar. The difference that followed was not dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It arrived the way most real things arrive, incrementally, almost invisibly. One small shift at a time that you only recognize as a pattern when you stepped back far enough to see the whole of it. The Holloway statement ran in the Gazette on Monday morning, 14 column inches below the fold on the front page, attributed to Holloway's attorney and written in the bloodless language of legal settlement. It said that the regulatory complaints filed against the Black Stallion Bar over the preceding 4 months had been sourced through improper channels and did not reflect accurately the bar's compliance with county health and safety regulations. All complaints were formally withdrawn. Charlotte read it, standing at the library's periodical rack, having picked up a copy on her way to work. She read it twice. Then she set the paper down carefully and drove to the bar. By 10 o'clock that morning, 3 people had called Marcus. Not about the settlement, not about Holloway, but about the bar itself. A woman named Patricia, who ran the church auxiliary on Miller Street, called to ask if the Black Stallion would be willing to host a fundraiser dinner for Edna Riordan, who needed new kitchen appliances and whose story Patricia had apparently heard through the slow channels that small-town information moved through. A man named Bill Henshaw, who owned the hardware store 3 blocks over, called to say he'd always meant to come in and just hadn't, and was there a good night to stop by. A teacher at the elementary school called to ask, somewhat hesitantly, clearly, aware of how the question might land, whether the club would be interested in participating in the town's fall community day, because apparently someone had mentioned to someone who had mentioned to her that the Hells Angels had been doing things for people in this town for years, without anyone really knowing about it. Marcus took all the 3 calls. He said yes to Patricia, yes to Bill, and he paused for almost 10 full seconds before he said yes to the teacher, which Charlotte counted because she was standing close enough to hear both sides of the call, and she understood what that pause contained. 31 years of being the thing people crossed the street to avoid, in a town that was only now beginning to ask whether it had been wrong about what it was crossing the street away from. That's going to be interesting, Charlotte said when he hung up. It's going to be something, he said. He looked at the phone for a moment. Carol always said the town would figure it out eventually. He set the phone down. She was more patient than I am. How long did she say it would take? She never said. He almost smiled. She just said eventually. Charlotte thought about that for the rest of the morning. She thought about it while she was going over the supplier accounts with Marcus, learning the names and numbers and histories of relationships he'd been maintaining for 3 decades, the shorthand that existed between people who had done business together long enough to stop needing to explain everything. She thought about Carol Callahan, who had believed that eventually the town would see her husband's people for who they actually were, and who hadn't lived to see this Monday morning with its 14 column inches in the Gazette and its 3 phone calls from people who had finally started asking questions. She wished Carol could have seen it. She thought Marcus did too. The week moved fast. It moved the way weeks move when the thing that has been pressing against you from one direction is suddenly gone, and you find yourself moving forward with a momentum that surprises you because you'd forgotten what it felt like to not be pushing back against something. Derek's daughter had her surgery on Wednesday. Charlotte found out at 7 in the morning when Derek texted her a single sentence. She came through. She read it 3 times, set her phone face down on the bar, and stood still for a moment with her hand over her mouth, because some feelings require a physical response, even when there's nobody watching. She was fine by the time Marcus arrived. She didn't tell him about the text because she didn't need to. Derek had called him first. Marcus came in that morning with a different quality of stillness. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing something, but the stillness of someone who has received good news and is holding it quietly because some good news is too large for noise. He made his coffee and came out to the bar and stood there for a moment. Derek's daughter's through, Charlotte said, because she knew he knew, and saying it out loud felt like the right thing. Yes, Marcus said. That was all either of them said about it. But Pete, who never made anything without reason, sent out a plate of something sweet from the kitchen at 8:15 with no explanation and no ticket, and that was how Pete said what Marcus and Charlotte had already said in fewer words. The fundraiser for Edna Riordan happened the following Saturday. Charlotte had not expected it to be big. She had expected 20 people, maybe 30 people, who already had a connection to Edna, or to the church, auxiliary, or to the bar. She had organized the practical details tables, food, a suggested donation amount, a sign-up sheet for volunteers, with the modest ambition of someone who knew that healing between a community and a group it had feared for decades was not going to happen in one evening. She was wrong about the size. 63 people came. She stood behind the bar at 7 o'clock and counted them because counting was what she did when something was larger than she'd planned for, and she needed to understand the dimensions of it. 63 people in a room that held 50 comfortably, which meant people were standing and nobody was leaving. Patricia from the church auxiliary worked the sign-in table with the focused energy of a woman who had organized events her whole life and recognized when one was going better than expected. Bill Henshaw from the hardware store was at a table near the bar with his wife eating wings and talking to Grizzly, who was across from him in full cut and patch, and appeared to be holding up his half of a conversation about roofing materials with complete authority. Because Grizzly had in fact replaced 3 roofs in Silver Creek in the past 2 years and knew more about the topic than Bill Henshaw was visibly prepared for. The teacher from the elementary school. Her name was Mrs. Delgado. Charlotte had learned, and she had been teaching 3rd grade for 19 years, and had the particular unflappable quality of someone who had managed rooms of 8-year-olds long enough to find most adult situations manageable by comparison, was talking to Marcus near the pool table. Charlotte watched them from across the room. Marcus had his arms crossed, which was his default posture, but his face was doing the thing it did when he was actually engaged rather than managing an interaction. The slight loosening around the jaw, the quality of attention that meant he was actually listening rather than calculating his response. Mrs. Delgado said something Charlotte couldn't hear. Marcus uncrossed his arms. He said something back. Mrs. Delgado laughed. Charlotte had never heard Marcus make someone laugh before. She had seen him produce near smiles. She had seen him command rooms. She had not seen him make a school teacher laugh. She filed it away as one of the better things she had seen. Edna Riordan was there in her wheelchair at a table near the middle of the room where she could see everything without craning. She was wearing a purple blouse and the expression of a woman who was slightly overwhelmed by the attention but fundamentally pleased about it. 2 of the younger club members had appointed themselves her unofficial logistics team for the evening, making sure her glass was full and her view was unobstructed. With the easy attentiveness of young men who had grown up in the orbit of Marcus Callahan and understood without being told what taking care of someone actually looked like. At 8:30, Charlotte stepped from behind the bar to take a 10-minute break, the first one she'd taken all evening. She stood near the back hallway and looked at the room. Jake found her there. He came and stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and looked at the room with her. He had a bottle of water he wasn't drinking. 63, he said. You counted 2, she said. Old habit. He was quiet for a moment. I've been coming to this bar for 11 years, he said. I've never seen it look like this. Charlotte looked at the room, at the Hells Angels and the church auxiliary, and the hardware store owner, and the 3rd grade teacher, and Edna Riordan in her purple blouse, at Grizzly explaining roofing to Bill Henshaw, at Marcus Callahan standing with his arms uncrossed for the first time in recent memory. What does it look like? She asked because she wanted to hear him say it. Jake was quiet for a moment. Not the old quiet, the guarded distance that had been his default when she'd first arrived. This was different, the quiet of someone choosing their words because the words mattered. It looks like what it always was, he said, except now other people can see it. Charlotte felt something move through her chest that she recognized now as the specific emotion produced by being right about something you'd hoped for but hadn't been certain of. She had walked through that door 3 months ago, hoping that what was inside it was different from what the town believed. She had been right, and now 63 people were inside the proof of it. Jake, she said. He looked at her. Why did you stay? She asked. In Silver Creek. You could have gone anywhere. You could have joined a chapter somewhere bigger, somewhere with more. She gestured vaguely at the general concept of more. Why here? He thought about it seriously, which was what Jake Dawson did with questions that deserved serious answers. My brother died here, he said, in a car accident, 14 years ago. I came for the funeral and Marcus met me at the door of this bar and handed me a coffee and didn't say anything, just handed me the coffee and sat down across from me and stayed there for 2 hours while I talked and didn't talk and talked again. He looked at the bar. I never left after that. Charlotte held that image in her mind. Marcus Callahan sitting across a table from a grieving 24-year-old Jake Dawson with a cup of coffee and 2 hours of silence and presence. He does that, she said. He does. Jake agreed. She looked at him. He did it for me too. He just didn't know he was doing it. Jake turned to look at her. What do you mean? The first morning, she said. He poured coffee at 5:45 before anyone else arrived. He walked me through the whole layout. Every corner of this place took an hour of his time on a woman who had walked in off the street with a piece of paper. He didn't have to do that. He did it because he does it. She paused. And then you did it too. You left coffee on the bar. Jake looked at her for a moment with that particular quality of attention she had come to think of as specifically his full and direct and not decorative, the attention of someone who said things he meant and meant things he said. I learned from him, Jake said simply. Charlotte nodded slowly. Then something happened that neither of them had planned for. Edna Reardon's voice, which was small, but carried the way voices do when a room is briefly quiet, cut across the space from her table near the middle. Young lady, Edna said. Every head in the immediate vicinity turned. Charlotte walked toward her. Edna looked up at her with the sharp, unhurried gaze of a 74-year-old woman who had been assessing people for decades and had very little patience for anything that wasn't genuine. I know who fixed my roof, Edna said. I know it was these men. I know nobody told me because they don't do things like that for the telling. She paused. Her hands were folded in her lap with the stillness of age. I also know that somebody new around here had something to do with all this. She gestured at the room with one hand. 63 people. A Saturday night. The black stallion full of light and noise, and the particular warmth of a space that had opened itself up. That was you. Charlotte shook her head. That was already here, she said. I just stopped letting people pretend it wasn't. Edna studied her for a long moment. That's not a small thing, she said. Don't undersell it. Charlotte smiled. Yes, ma'am. Edna nodded once satisfied and went back to her conversation with the woman beside her. Charlotte stood still for a moment. Then she went back to the bar because there were 63 people who needed drinks, and she was the person who knew how to give them what they needed. The fundraiser raised $4,200 for Edna Reardon's kitchen. Patricia called Charlotte the next morning to report the number, and Charlotte wrote it down on the notepad she kept behind the bar and looked at it for a moment after she hung up. $4,200 from 63 people in a room that 3 months ago nobody in Silver Creek would have voluntarily entered. She told Marcus when he came in. He looked at the number on the notepad. We'll match it, he said. Marcus. Write it down, he said. We'll cut Edna a check for the difference between what she needs and what the room raised. Whatever that is. Charlotte wrote it down. She was beginning to understand that this was who Marcus Callahan was, had always been, would always be a man who had been doing the right thing for so long that it had stopped being a decision and become simply the way he moved through the world. The town had missed it for 3 decades. She was not going to let them miss it again. The weeks that followed built on each other the way good things build, not in the dramatic upward arc of a story you're telling, but in the quiet accumulation of days where more things are right than wrong. The Black Stallion's foot traffic grew. Not spectacularly, this was not a viral moment, not a news story, not anything that happened at the speed of modern attention. It grew the way word of mouth grows in a small town where people actually know each other and talk across back fences and mention things at the hardware store and in the church auxiliary and in the elementary school staff room. Bill Henshaw came back with 4 friends. Mrs. Delgado brought her husband, who turned out to be a man named Ray, who had worked road construction for 20 years and had 3 opinions about everything and fit into the Black Stallion like he had always belonged there. Patricia from the church auxiliary became a semi-regular, which nobody had predicted, and everyone seemed to accept as naturally as if it had always been the plan. Pete started making extra food. He never said why. He just started sending out more plates unprompted to tables that hadn't ordered them in the way that Pete communicated everything through action without explanation, as though the explanation would diminish the gesture. Charlotte stopped questioning it and started factoring it into her nightly inventory. Grizzly, who was not a man given to conversation with people he didn't know, developed a standing Tuesday afternoon exchange with Bill Henshaw that appeared to be entirely about home repair and that both of them seemed to genuinely enjoy. Charlotte watched it the first time it happened with the particular delight of witnessing something unexpected that turned out to be inevitable. And Derek Vaughn came back to the bar 6 weeks after the settlement. Charlotte was the first one to see him. He came in on a Thursday evening, which had always been his day, and he looked different, not healed, because some things don't heal in 6 weeks, but lighter in the specific way of a person who has set down something they'd been carrying for a long time and is learning to stand upright without it. His daughter's surgery had gone well. She was in recovery, doing better than the doctors had expected. And the particular quality of that outcome, the specific mercy of a child who comes through the other side, had done something to Derek's face that no amount of time or resolution or apology could have done alone. He sat at the bar. Charlotte set a drink in front of him without being asked. "How's she doing?" Charlotte said. "She's giving the nurses grief about the food," Derek said, "which the doctor says is a very good sign." Charlotte smiled. "Sounds about right." He was quiet for a moment. He looked around the bar, at the fuller tables, at the different faces, at the way the room had changed in texture since the last time he'd been in it. "It's different in here," he said. "A little," Charlotte agreed. He looked at her. "Is it okay that I'm here?" Charlotte looked at him directly. "You're a member of this chapter," she said, "and you told the truth when the truth cost you everything. So yes, it's okay that you're here." Derek nodded once, the nod of a man receiving something he hadn't been certain he deserved. He drank his drink. He talked to a few people. He stayed 2 hours and left before midnight, and when he left, Grizzly, who had been at the pool table for most of the evening, looked up and gave him a nod as he passed. Not the full restoration of everything, but a door left open. Charlotte watched it happen and felt the truth of something she'd been forming in the back of her mind for weeks settle into a clarity she could actually name. People could make terrible mistakes without being entirely terrible. She had said that to herself the night she'd heard Derek's story, and she had acted on it before she'd fully understood why. Now she understood. She had known it because she had lived it not in the same way Derek had lived it, not with the same stakes or the same darkness, but she had known what it felt like to be a person in a situation where every option was bad and survival required choosing the least bad one and living with what that cost. She had come to Silver Creek with no good options and chosen the one that scared her most. That was not the same as what Derek had done, but it was close enough in shape that she had recognized his humanity before she'd had time to judge it. And recognizing someone's humanity was where everything in this story had started. It was a Saturday in November when Marcus asked her to sit down at the back table again. Not the urgency of the earlier back table conversations, the ones that had been about Holloway and documents and injunctions. This one had the quality of something he'd been planning to say for a while and had decided today was the day. He had 2 coffees. He set one in front of her. He sat down. "I want to tell you something," he said. Charlotte waited. "When you walked in here in August," he said, "I almost told you the job was filled." She looked at him. "Why didn't you?" "Because you put your resume on my bar," he said, "and you looked at me like you were afraid and decided it didn't matter, and I hadn't seen that in a long time." He picked up his coffee. "Carol used to do that, decide that the fear didn't matter. It was the thing I loved most about her." He set the cup down. "When I saw it in you, I figured the least I could do was give you a shot." Charlotte held that for a moment. The idea that she had gotten her one chance not because of her 4 years of bartending experience or her ability to hold eye contact or anything she had consciously done, but because Marcus Callahan had seen in the way she was afraid something that reminded him of his wife. "I didn't know that," she said. "No," he said. "I didn't tell you on purpose. I didn't want it to be the reason you felt like you owed me something." He looked at her directly. "You don't owe me anything. What happened here, what you built, what you figured out, what you refused to let go of, that was you." Charlotte felt something move through her that was larger than the moment could easily hold. She looked down at her coffee for a second because some things require a small pause before you can continue being steady. "She would have liked you," Marcus said. "Carol, she would have had opinions about everything you did, and most of them would have been right." "High praise," Charlotte said. "Highest I've got," he said. They sat there for a moment in the comfortable quiet of 2 people who have been through something together and don't need to keep explaining it to each other. Then Charlotte said, I have something to tell you too. He looked at her. When I was standing outside this bar, she said before I came in the first time, I counted 11 minutes. I stood there for 11 minutes deciding whether to walk through the door. She paused. I was terrified. I know, Marcus said. You couldn't have known, she said. I didn't show it. I know because everyone who walks through that door for the first time is terrified, he said. That's not a special thing. The special thing is what you did with it. He looked at her. You came in anyway. Charlotte nodded slowly. And then you stayed, he said. That's the part most people don't do. The bar opened at 10. It filled away. It always filled now with the original regulars who had been coming for years and with the newer faces who had found their way in through the widening opening that Edna's fundraiser and the Gazette statement and 6 weeks of word of mouth had created. Grizzly at his usual spot, Pete's extra plates arriving at tables that hadn't asked. Gloria on her Thursday with her sweet tea and her solitaire watching everything with her sharp eyes and her steady, quiet satisfaction. Jake came in at noon and went behind the bar. This was common now, expected the natural result of the fact that as Charlotte had moved into the manager role, she sometimes needed someone to cover her in while she handled other things. He picked up where she left off without a word, serving 3 people his sequence with the economy of someone who had watched her long enough to know the rhythms. At 2 in the afternoon, Mrs. Delgado came in with a group of people Charlotte didn't recognize. She introduced them as colleagues from the school district who were visiting for the day, and she said it with the casual ease of someone who no longer had to explain why she was bringing people to the Black Stallion, because the Black Stallion had become the kind of place that didn't require an explanation. Charlotte gave them menus. Grizzly from the other end of the bar raised his glass in their direction. Mrs. Delgado's colleagues looked surprised, and then not surprised because the energy in the room was the kind that absorbed new people and made them feel within about 10 minutes like they had been there before. At 4, Bill Henshaw came in with a problem. Not a crisis, a genuine hardware and construction problem, a load-bearing wall question that had come up on a renovation project and that he'd been trying to work out all day. He presented it to Grizzly, who presented it to another member named Tommy, who had done framing for 15 years, and the 3 of them were deep in an engineering conversation at the bar by 4:15 that Charlotte monitored from a distance with quiet amusement. At 5:30, she stepped outside for 10 minutes. The desert was cooling toward evening, the way desert evenings do, the heat pulling back fast once the sun started to angle the light going gold and long across everything. She stood in the parking lot where 3 months ago she had counted 11 minutes and decided to stop counting. She thought about what this place had been when she arrived, what the town had believed about it, what the men inside it had been living with for 31 years, doing good things in the dark, not because the dark was where they belonged, but because the light had never been offered to them. She thought about what it was now. Not different at its core, the Black Stallion was still the Black Stallion. Marcus was still Marcus, the men who had fixed roofs and paid medical bills. In quiet were still the same men. The difference was that the town was finally watching. The wall hadn't come down. It had simply become transparent. And people had looked through it and found that what they'd been afraid of was in its deepest nature not so different from themselves. She went back inside. The bar was full, not just bodies full in the way that rooms are full, when the people in them are genuinely present, actually talking, actually there. The noise had the quality of warmth rather than volume. Jake caught her eye from behind the bar. She walked over. "Good day," he said, not a question. "Good day," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You remember what you told me when I asked what you'd do after all of this was over?" "I said I'd keep showing up at 5:45, she said. "And I said nobody was stopping the coffee." He looked at her. "That still stands." Charlotte felt the warmth of it move through her in the specific way that simple things land when they've been earned rather than given. She looked at him, at Jake Dawson, who had watched her from the end of the bar for 3 months, with careful eyes that were learning to be less careful, who had left coffee without explanation and stayed without being asked, and stood beside her in every hard moment without needing to be positioned there. "I know," she said. She went back to work. The bar moved around her with its familiar rhythms, the regulars and the newcomers, and Pete's unexplained generosity from the kitchen, and Gloria's Thursday solitaire, and Marcus at the center of it all, the fixed point that everything else turned around. Charlotte moved through it with the ease of someone who knew exactly where she was and exactly why she was there. She had come to Silver Creek, Arizona with $412 and nowhere to go. She had walked through a door everyone told her was the wrong door. She had found inside it a community that the town had been mislabeling for 30 years. She had found people who fixed roofs in secret and paid medical bills without leaving their names and showed up to funerals when no one else could come. She had found a man who gave people chances when they had run out of places to find one. She had found a colleague who became something that didn't fit the word colleague, and a friend who became something that didn't fit the word friend either. She had found a home that didn't look like any home she'd imagined. And she had stayed. Not because it was easy, and not because it was safe, and not because anyone had promised her that staying would work out. She had stayed because the fear of leaving had become larger than the fear of staying, which was the only calculation that had ever mattered. Months later, when people in Silver Creek told the story of how the Black Stallion changed, and people did tell it because small towns tell the stories of the things that happen inside them. It's how they know who they are. They told it different ways. Some of them said it was the Holloway case, the injunction, the statement in the Gazette. Some of them said it was Edna Reardon's fundraiser. Some of them said it was just time that the town had been ready and hadn't known it. But Gloria, who had been watching from her Thursday corner table since before most of the story happened, told it the most accurately. She said a young woman from Ohio walked into a bar that everybody in town had decided was dangerous, and instead of finding what everybody said she'd find, she found what was actually there. And then she stayed long enough to show everybody else. And what people meant when they said that what the story meant when it finally settled into the form it would keep was not that Charlotte Miller was fearless. She was not fearless. She had been afraid from the first minute to the last, and she was probably still a little afraid now, and would be for a long time, because fear is not the opposite of courage. It is the very condition that courage requires. What the story meant was that one person willing to walk through the wrong door and stay long enough to find out what was really on the other side could change the entire story that a town told about itself. Charlotte Miller had walked through the door. She had stayed, and Silver Creek, Arizona would never tell its story quite the same way again.